didn't do a superhero. I did more of a short story literary hero. My character's name is Helen Faulkner. Helen, after Helen of Troy. Faulkner, because William Faulkner wrote a story about Troy. Also, like, she's kind of shaped after, you know, you asked what kind of character she kind of took shape after, and I said Hermione, mainly because when I was little, I always identified with Hermione. And also, fun fact, Helen of Troy had a daughter called Hermione.
What?
Yeah. Everything just fell into place.
So many
Okay, I'll just read it. I'm not quite done, but I'll read it and fill in the blanks. Helen Faulkner had never liked her name. It was pretentious and elicited too many expectations of her. At least she always thought so. Her parents had chosen the name Helen after Helen of Troy, the daughter of Zeus who brought turmoil and war between two ancient cities simply because of her beauty. Our Helen never saw the appeal of the name. Okay, sure, the woman was supposedly stunning. That must have been nice. Whenever Helen caught her reflection in the dresser mirror facing her bed, the feature she always noticed was her graceful face, round but not doll-like, underneath the wild mess that was her honey brown hair. She never called herself graceful. That was her mother's word. In a world like this, you had to choose your words wisely. Her nose was ordinarily shaped and slightly large, never liked her mother's cute button nose, and her lips were unevenly full, if only slightly. Her most complimented feature was always her eyes, but she didn't get complimented on their eyes, she thought. Blue with streaks of gray, they often reminded her of the dawn after a particularly stormy night she could never quite sleep through. Wrapping her figure was the pale skin, which was never porcelain or any of those romantic words, just simply lightly colored with a faint flush. Helen looked simple, but not plain or fragile. Simple, she always thought. That's exactly it. I'm just a conglomeration of simple. No, I guess sometimes simple adds up to beauty, but still, certainly nothing to start a war over. Throughout school, Helen had always been the observer of the group. She fit in with most of the boys, because the girls never had the right priorities, according to her. What Helen found contentment in was reading. Fantasies, religious texts, biographies, murder mysteries, poetry, or anything she could get her hands on. Books, other than the text, were hard to encounter in the towns these days. 39 years ago, the revolution began. The citizens of Nessius, side note, that means ignorance in Latin, had always been an enthusiastic people, and one day it exploded. Women were wailing in the streets, men were rioting in the Capitol, and children were screaming parent-fed propaganda during school. The people had decided they didn't want knowledge or information anymore. Seeing the news relay murder stories every day and reading the bloody history of Nessius had become too much. The citizens wanted ignorance. Ignorance protected them from themselves. Ignorance brought peace, but along with ignorance came destruction. News and radio stations around the nation were burned. Libraries were shut down throughout Nessius, and only figures with authorized permission could enter the forsaken buildings. The debate about libraries went on for years. Some people thought no person should have to hold the burden of knowledge. Others thought it would be imprudence to burn the books. What if they needed to learn from them again to repress the people? The most significant form of repression was the word reckoning. Around every citizen's wrist, a bracelet was attached once he reached the age of 12, which was 7 years ago for Helen. The bracelet reset to 750 when the clock struck midnight each night. For every word spoken, the bracelet would count down. The revolutionaries decided the best way to learn about what was happening in the world was from one another. They couldn't have that. Before the revolution, people spoke about 16,000 words a day. Now they were confined to 750. You had 750 words to express yourself. You chose carefully. The people who didn't have the word reckoning were authority figures. Coincidentally, they were the same people who were deemed access to the libraries. Well, legal access. Helen had always been adept at quietness, and being alone was her favorite part of the day. Her parents accepted Helen's withdrawn attitude and often left her alone in her room to paint, as she always did. Helen came home from school that day, said "I love you" to her mother and father, and climbed the stairs to her room like always. Opening the door, her masterpieces in progress were always sprawled around. Pictures of dragons on chairs, ancient gods on the windowsill, you name it. Helen loved to paint, and often illustrated the images those forbidden books left in her head at night. This is what her parents always thought she was doing, painting and creating. In reality, Helen went to the library every day. Putting her foot onto the bowing branch just within reach, Helen fit her slender figure through the half-opened window. She pulled her backpack out after her, straddling the branch, and fixed it on her back. The back of the house faced woods, so the only things that watched her were the critters scuttling about. Helen had a great affinity for the animals. When she wasn't inside painting, Helen was outside playing with her dog and the deer. She always hid nuts in her backpack for the animals she would meet walking through the trees. Helen started on the same path she always took, taking a right past the aspen tree, a skip over the stream, and a left at the fallen pine. She had found the path while wandering when she was young. Coming up the back of the library, Helen scaled the poorly aligned bricks and popped out one of the iron bars in the window that had rusted through. She could barely fit, but she always found a way to squeeze. Where will I start today, she thought. She was reading Common Sense yesterday and quite liked it, but never finished it. Well, there's nowhere better to start. She meandered the rows until she found what she was looking for and plucked the book by the spine. Looking around, Helen found a new place to sit today. There was a dusty, damp office in the back corner of the library that looked like it hadn't been touched in centuries. In all honesty, it probably hadn't. She never dared to cross the threshold before, but she was feeling a bit gutsy today. Strolling over the door, Helen pushed slightly. It swung open with a creak, and she stepped carefully to the desk. Unslinging her backpack, Helen plopped on the desk chair and placed her feet on the desk. Helen flipped through the pages until she found the page she left off on. To Helen, her words were sacred, but she saved a special amount for her favorite quote of the day. She would mumble the words under the dark rows of books, if only to suspend them for the dark in a moment. Maybe it was because of that gutsy feeling she often had, or maybe it was because she had been feeling a fire smolder in her for a while now. But today the chosen line was, "We have it in our power to begin the world over again." Thomas Paine must have been a revolutionist too, she thought. Empowered by the epiphany, Helen spoke, "We must revolt." A shuffling noise came from the front door. Her feet slipped off the desk and she sat upright. That was no mouse. Quietly stowing the book in her bag, Helen tiptoed out of the office. As she turned to walk away, Helen noticed a little red light. Now that was new. She backtracked to the desk and noticed the red light came from beneath the cloth. She slowly peeled the cloth from whatever it was hiding and saw a microphone sitting. The front door banged open and light poured into the dark building. "Who's here?" shouted the officer. "Crap," was all that slipped out of Helen's mouth before all of the guards of her run-down town spilled into the library, armed and ready. "You're going to walk out with your hands on your head. You have until the count of 5. 1. Helen had approximately 3 seconds to decide what to do. She could easily slip away. She was good at quiet. She was easily hidden now in the back corner of the library. She could make it. But could she bring herself to do it? No. Today, Helen would start a war. Stepping out from behind the shelves, Helen raised her hands and strode forward. "Drop down," commanded the chief. He walked up to Helen and whispered in her ear, "The whole town heard you. The library used to be the town center, and you just made an announcement." Dragging her by the cuffs, the officer pulled Helen into the middle of the town square and threw her on the ground. Look at the cockroach this woman is," he screamed to the crowd surrounding the library. "Don't you dare think for a second that you know what you're talking about. You know nothing. Absolutely nothing. These books are garbage. Don't come close to even setting 1 foot through that threshold, or we'll find all of you like we found her." But something was happening in the crowd. The crowd, okay, that's where I kind of stopped, because I'm not done. The crowd conglomerates towards the door, and they all go inside and they read. And she ends up being shot. Sorry. But the people now have the knowledge, and they eventually, everything goes back to right. They revolt. They cut off the bracelets and everything like that, and she's heralded in the square. There's a statue of her at the end because she brought upon the city to revolt.